Hi there. I'm Hannah McLeod, and I'm a narrative designer at Crystal Dynamics and one of the writers on Marvel's Avengers. This is getting the most out of an entry-level games job, and I thought the most appropriate way to get started would be to talk a little bit about my first job in the games industry. My first job was at Telltale Games, working on The Walking Dead: A New Frontier, aka Season 3, and Minecraft Story Mode Season 2. My job title was Creative Development Assistant, or CDA for short. And if you have no idea what that title means, you're not alone. Most people at Telltale didn't know either. There were 4 of us, 1 CDA per project, and our primary duties involved taking court reporter style notes in meetings and exporting voiceover scripts for recording sessions. I loved my job, but the reality of it could be a little jarring. We didn't have a manager. Well, we had a manager the first couple months at my job, and then she got promoted and moved departments, and they never replaced her. We didn't have a promotion ladder. We had 2 CDAs, former CDAs, who'd moved into narrative design and audio design, respectively, but no clear idea how they did it and if that method would even work for us. We didn't even really have a department. Our time card said we were in production, but we could answer to creative, audio, and it could change by the day, by the hour. And we didn't really have a lot of training. Our training involved shadowing a CDA for a couple of weeks before getting dropped in the deep end of our own solo project. Despite, or I guess because of all of this, by the end of my tenure at Telltale, I was a credited writer on the last 3 episodes of Minecraft Story Mode Season 2. That's me. And from talking to other developers, I've realized I'm not special. Entry-level positions in the games industry are rare. Even mine was phased out before the studio closed in 2018, so you kind of have to take what you can get. And it's not always the exact job you want. Beggars can't be choosers. And I don't think I can change the entire industry with One Talks, especially their approach to entry-level positions. But I decided I'm going to try to give you a toolbox of sorts to get through this chaotic, often nebulous time in your game development career. A couple of caveats before we start, though. The studio I worked at no longer exists, which is why I can be pretty explicit with my job duties and examples of the things that I did. Not everyone has that opportunity, and, well, we're in an NDA world, so I don't begrudge anyone not sharing more details about their first job. I also work in narrative, so most of my examples are going to be narrative-based, but the advice is meant to be as department agnostic as possible. I also know that a lot of people, including myself, are still working remotely and may be working remotely permanently. So I try to make the advice work if you're in a remote position or if you're in the office. So your mileage may vary, but I'm hoping by the end of this talk that you'll have at least one thing you can try to get yourself noticed, which is the goal, by the way. It's to get noticed in your first job. You succeed in this industry by building connections. Games are beautifully collaborative and notoriously unreliable. And the reason I can even be here today is because people noticed me and helped me forward. Yes, you also need to hone your skills and work hard and make a great game. But I would be nowhere without all of the people that I did those things with. In fact, even if you only get noticed by one person in your first job, that's a success. Congratulations. You've started building your network. And one last caveat. Do not do all of the things that I suggest in this talk at once for one job. I tried to. I don't recommend it. And I'll get into that a little bit more at the end. So the first piece of advice that I ever received was from Steve McManus, who was a designer who sat next to me at the open office at Telltale. He doesn't remember this, but a couple of weeks into my first job, he leaned over and suggested that I take my headphones off sometimes. Now, if you've ever worked in an open office, you know headphones are kind of necessary to get any work done. But what he meant was if I listened to the studio around me, I might learn some things. And he was completely right. So right that I kind of use listening as core to all the rest of my advice in this talk. It's kind of your secrets. Yeah, it's kind of your super secret weapon that you can always fall back on when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're not sure what you should be doing. So remotely, listening looks a little different. It could mean following a Slack channel, even if you're not 100% sure it applies to you, or listening to the chit chat before and after a Zoom meeting, not just the meeting itself. Or it could even mean following an email thread as some team bats a proposal back and forth. So it's probably better to say, if you're remote, to keep your headphones on sometimes. Okay, so you have your super secret weapon. It's harder to say than I thought. Now it's time to talk about who you want to get noticed by in your first job. And we're going to start really, really easy. Your manager. I know. I just said I didn't have one in my first job, and that's true. But I have one now, and she's great. Hi, Nicole. And if you are lucky enough to have a manager in your first job, you got to use it. So if you don't know what a manager does, it's their job to kind of keep track of how well you're doing in your job. They will give you performance reviews if your studio has formal ones, and they're kind of your gatekeeper to any promotions that you might get. It's also their job to kind of gather feedback from your other teammates to see how well they like working with you and if they have any ways you could improve, which is great because it avoids the awkward situation of having to ask people directly for that kind of feedback. The reason that it is so easy to get noticed by your manager is because it's literally their job to notice you and advocate for you in the studio. Now, not all managers are created equal. Some are more invested than others, but you're only really going to get as much from your manager relationship as you put into it. So the first way to get noticed by your manager is to tell them your career goals right from the start. I was clear in my interview for the CDA job that I wanted to be a game writer. I submitted writing samples with my resume, and it just so happened that my temporary manager was one of the people interviewing me. So she also spread the word about my career goals so that when I started on my first solo project, which was Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, the team already knew going in that that was something I wanted to do. And I am a woman in game development, so I know there is this hesitancy to not come across too ambitious in our work, but I want to nip that in the bud right now. No one expects an entry-level employee wants to be in that role forever. So sharing your ambitions is one step closer to making them a reality. So be ambitious. The other way to get noticed by your manager is to schedule weekly one-on-ones. So your manager is also a game developer, which means they're super busy. And they're even more so if they have to manage more people than just you. So you want to try to stay on their radar as much as possible. These one-on-ones can be short check-ins or long vent sessions, depending on your relationship. But it's supposed to be for talking about how the job is going. And if you're having any issues that you need feedback or advice on, and any feedback they might have for you on how you could do better. If you're remote, I really suggest that you check in with your manager more often than just once a week. Right now I work from home, so my manager and I are kind of in constant contact over Slack. That way we can raise any issues that we're having as quickly as possible, and we don't have to wait until the next check-in. There's this kind of out of sight, out of mind mentality if you don't do that. It's also fine to skip these one-on-ones occasionally if you don't have anything to talk about that week, but I highly recommend you keep them on the calendar so that your manager can see the notification and go, oh yeah, that person is here and they're doing well. If you don't have a manager or your manager isn't as invested as you'd like them to be, the next easiest person to get the attention of is the person you report to. So sometimes that is your manager, but for a lot of people, it's a different person. In fact, I gave a survey to some of my fellow game writers and I asked them what they wish they would have known before their first job in the industry. And a surprisingly large amount of people wish they'd known who they were supposed to report to. So some advice on figuring out who this person is. ask during your interview? It's actually a really great question to ask early because it can give you an idea of what the position is for based on who it reports to. And if the person you report to happens to be in your interview, it gives you the chance to sort of ask about their leadership style and the day-to-day task load. If you miss the chance to ask during your interview, ask during orientation, because the last thing you want is to be dropped off at your desk or dropped off off of a Zoom call and not know who you're supposed to be talking to or what you're supposed to be doing. The person you receive your day-to-day tasks from is the person you report to. They're also the person that you show your work to receive feedback. Also, this person can change. Unlike your manager, which tends to be pretty stable if you have one, the person you report to can change depending on the project you're on, what part of the production process you're in. For me, when I first started, the person I reported to was a fellow CDA who was training me. So I would report to him, and then he would divvy up his own tasks between us. When I got assigned to Minecraft Story Mode, it was still a pretty small team. So I answered directly to the lead writer, and he would have me do research and that sort of thing. As we got well into production, I answered to the creative producer who was in charge of scheduling and meetings and all of that stuff. And then as we got to recording, because I was the one exporting the voiceover scripts, I would report to the voice director and then would make sure that the VO was all getting in where it needed to be in the game. The way to get the person you report to notice you. At first, it looks a lot like your manager. You want to tell them your career goals, but for a slightly different reason. The person you report to controls your tasks. So if they know your career goals, they can start tailoring those tasks to help you achieve those goals. They can also give you FaceTime with the departments you might want to join if you're not in the department that you want to be right now. And they can also volunteer you for tasks when you're too shy to, or maybe you aren't there when the task comes up. In fact, the person you report to can end up being your biggest advocate for increased responsibilities and promotions because they see you every day. You can also schedule one-on-one meetings with them if you want. It's slightly less necessary because you're seeing them all the time. But if you feel like the person you report to could be doing more to help you with your career advancement, then absolutely set those up. But the best method to get the attention of the person you report to is actually to report to them. When you're out of tasks and not sure what you should be doing, go ask the person you report to if there's anything you can do to help. It shows initiative and that you can be depended on, and they might even give you tasks that they were thinking of doing themselves until they realized you were free. At Telltale, I've really enjoyed the fact that I had multiple people to report to because it meant if one person didn't have any tasks for me, I could go to somebody else. The other way to get the attention of the person you report to is to employ our super secret weapon, listening. So when someone comes up to the person you report to and asks them for something, is it ever a task that you think you might be able to handle? Is there anything that's on their plate that you could take off their plate? For example, my creative producer was often asked for collated data of our voiceover process. So like, how many lines did we record for the last episode? What is the line count for this character? I knew that information was easy, if slightly tedious to find, so I volunteered to do it. And then I put it together in a living document that I could update so that everyone who checked it had the most recent information. Our writers were often asked for Minecraft-driven solutions to creative problems. So it was a little hard for them to have an encyclopedic knowledge of Minecraft. So I would volunteer to research things like if they needed a block that had certain characteristics, I would volunteer to research that for them. The upside of listening into what the person you report to is being asked to do is it means you don't have to be caught up on tasks. You are already up to speed. I get a lot of compliments for this even now. Basically, every time someone comes up to the person I report to, I would take one headphone off and listen in just in case an action came out of it and I could help. It also helps the game of telephone that sometimes occurs when a task is getting to you can confuse like who asked for the task, what problem it was trying to solve, what exactly they want from you. So it's sometimes better to just hear it directly from the source. If you're not sitting near the person you report to, it's probably good to ask if you can be moved. If you can't, or if you're remote, then you just need to be a little extra vigilant. So if you see that someone asked in an email for something from the person you report to, maybe it's worth following up on that. Or if they're tagged in Slack, Or my manager, who's also the person I report to right now, I have her Jira tasks up on a board so that when someone sends something to her, I can see if it's something that I could take off her hands. The more of these kinds of tasks you complete, the more you'll get and the more positive attention you'll receive. In fact, these kinds of volunteer opportunities are sort of the first big steps I took towards becoming a game writer on Minecraft Story Mode. So, for example, our lead writer was asked to create the quiz at the beginning of season 2 that lets you do all the big choices from season 1 without having to actually play season 1. And I volunteered to do it because I was familiar with season 1, and that ended up being my first writing in the game. Another episode writer was introducing a bunch of new characters in her episode and asked me to join her she had to create a bunch of casting sheets. They're like bios and descriptions and personality for the character to help us cast them. And I volunteered to split the workload because there were a lot of them. And because I'd done the casting sheets for those particular characters, she then asked me to do the scenes that introduced to those characters because I was so familiar with them. We also had a creative team member in every voiceover session listening in on Skype so they could provide context to the voice director and the actor. And these were lengthy 4-hour sessions, so the creative team often didn't have time to be there the whole time, so I would volunteer. And it let me kind of show off my knowledge of the story and show I could do lengthy tasks without someone looking over my shoulder. Okay, that was a lot. Take a breath. Before you freak out about not knowing how to do any of these things or thinking that you'd never have enough knowledge to volunteer for something, let's talk about what you should be doing when you have nothing to do. You've asked the person you report to, or your manager, or both, if there's anything you can help with, and there really isn't. So you've got nothing to do, but you're trying to get noticed. This alone time is rare. So it's really a good time to take advantage of it to build your knowledge, because the more knowledge you have, the more confidence you'll have to volunteer for things in the future. So when you're asking yourself, what should I be doing right now? Let's start simple. Play the game. Seriously. You may think that's kind of obvious, but most of your coworkers are not going to have a lot of time to play the game in its entirety. Like, they'll play the level that they're working on over and over and over again, but it's probably been a while since they've played it from beginning to end. And you have no idea how much confidence you get if you're the only person in a room who can answer a question about the game as a whole because everybody else is so focused on one small part. If there's no game to play or no build that's working, try looking for documents. So pitch decks are a great buzzwordy way to get an overview of what the game's supposed to be. There's also design documents, which can give you overviews of the gameplay or animatics of the storyboards or even a script of all the cinematic moments. The idea is you're trying to get the big picture of a project because a lot of your coworkers will be pretty focused on their individual parts and won't have that same viewpoint. So that can give you something of value to contribute to a conversation. If your game is a sequel or prequel or spinoff, it's time to get familiar with those other games. Some people, they don't have a lot of time to play a lot of different games, so I would still recommend looking at a playthrough or reading summaries or looking at wikis. Your coworkers have probably already done this too, but it's probably been a while, so the details will be more fresh for you. It's also good to consider why changes were made from these other games to the one you're working on now. It's also a good way to break the ice with your coworkers if you can ask them, like, why was this particular change made? Minecraft Story Mode Season 2 was obviously a sequel, so I played Season 1, and that was why I had the confidence to volunteer for that quiz job, because I knew the details more in my head than the writer did. The next thing you can do is use your superpower to listen in to what games your game is being compared to. So game developers like to talk in comparisons because our different departments have very specialized technical language that doesn't really translate to other departments. So sometimes it's easier to compare something rather than try to explain all the technical details. Like if a boss designer is trying to explain a mechanic to the writing team, it's sometimes easier to go, like this boss fight. because then we can all be on the same page. It gives us a kind of common developer lingo that we can all use. For Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, we actually got compared to things that were not games a lot, which is also totally valid and worth checking out. Lord of the Rings came up quite a bit. I actually have not read the books, and I've only seen the movies once. So every time a scene from Lord of the Rings came up, I would write it down and I would go look at that scene later so that I could understand what everyone was talking about. Probably the one that came up the most was Avatar: The Last Airbender, because a lot of us had seen at least one episode of the show. So when someone brought up that as a pitch or an example, everyone was on the same page. It's also worth understanding why these kinds of comparisons are being made to your project. It's going to help you pitch ideas yourself in the future because you already have this lingo down that everyone else is using. It's also worth sometimes checking out what people don't want your game to be compared to, because it can be easier for some people to describe what a thing isn't than what a thing is. Okay, so if your game is based on an existing IP, which a lot of games are now, it's time to get to know that IP as well as possible. For Minecraft Story Mode, obviously, it was getting to know Minecraft. So I played Minecraft, but I also looked at wikis and watched YouTubers who play Minecraft. In fact, watching the YouTubers was almost more useful because they were a higher skill level than I was. So they could do more things in the game than I could just by myself. It also let me get to know the Minecraft community a little bit, which ended up being pretty important because Minecraft Story Mode features character versions of some of these YouTubers. For Avengers, obviously, I've now read a lot of comics. I have opinions on lore that I did not know the first thing about in 2017. So you're trying to become something of an amateur expert in your IP because, again, your coworkers have probably done this research before, but it's been a while. And it gives you even more of that shared language. You all have something that you can connect on and use as an example. In fact, you can even ask your coworkers for recommendations. So in my case for Minecraft, I would ask people about YouTubers that they particularly liked, or for Avengers about comic runs that were very influential. For all of these things, you want to take notes. Just, it helps you digest all of the things that you're taking in, and you can use them as a reference for later, which is really useful. Even if you never look at these notes again, it slows you down and lets you really take in what you're looking at, and it'll make it easier to remember it later. Okay, so you've done your research, you've built your knowledge base, you're feeling a bit more confident, you've even got a good rapport going with the person you report to or your manager or both. It's time to get the attention of the rest of your team, your coworkers. So, why do you want your coworkers to notice you? Well, game development is a team sport. Whether you're a team of 20 or 220, the industry is actually really tiny and we talk to each other. So it's probably better if people have something nice to say about you, you know? Also, most people don't stay in the same studio forever. So let's say you're going to a new studio and someone at your new studio knows someone at your old studio and they ask about you. Would it be better if someone has something nice to say than to not know who you are at all? And maybe you aren't in the department you want to be in yet. So you want to get the attention of that department. So here are some ways that I've used to get the attention of my fellow coworkers. It's all about volunteering. To take notes in meetings, to play test, to do Scratch VO, and to audit new hire training. So we're going to break these apart and sort of go into each one in detail. So you should always be taking notes in meetings for yourself. Every developer I know has a notebook that they carry around, but this is more volunteering to make notes for everyone in a meeting. One huge, gigantic caveat before we dive into it, women in game development are often relegated to being the note takers in meetings. Male developers, I'm sorry to say, are less likely to volunteer for that or even to think to volunteer for that. So now that I'm not entry level, I don't volunteer for this, especially because it was part of my job description as a CDA and I'm good at it. So it could be very easy for that to just become my job. But for entry level employees, taking notes in meetings is a really easy way to get the attention of everyone in the room if you do it right. So here are some tips. Okay, so Telltale had us taking court reporter style notes, which I don't recommend. They're very hard to skim through and they're very dense. The reason we did it was because it was very hierarchical there. So it mattered who gave what note because some people's notes were gospel and you had to do them, while others were just suggestions. And so they needed to be able to look at a note and know exactly who said it. I'm hoping most of that hierarchy is kind of on its way out, and so that matters less. But one thing they did have us do that was very useful was take attendance at the beginning of a meeting. So, in addition to helping you learn people's names and giving you an excuse to ask people their names, it helps the people looking at the notes to know who still needs to be run through a proposal or who still needs to give feedback on something. If you're remote, that calendar invite is not good enough because there will be people who say, yes, I'm attending this meeting, and then they don't show up, or vice versa. So you really want to take attendance based on the actual call. And some studios, actually a lot of them, have kind of databases of names and photographs to really help you as kind of a cheat sheet if you're really nervous. And Zoom obviously has little names and faces, so that can also help you in taking this attendance. The actual style of note that you take during the meeting does not matter. Just take it the way you're most comfortable. At Telltale, we typed our notes because, once again, it was court reporter style. But at Telltale, we typed our notes because, once again, it was court reporter style. But also, we had laptops, and obviously, work from home. It's easier for me to type my notes. But some people, they prefer to handwrite. It's really up to you what you want to do. The most important thing is what you do after the meeting, which is when you organize and internalize your notes. So, organizing your notes means making them clear and concise for public consumption. Shorter is always better. Bullet points over sentences every time. I also recommend doing headers for different discussions, maybe highlighting certain things or changing the font color in some places. This makes your notes easier to skim for other people, and they look pretty. And I get a lot of compliments when my notes look pretty, so I do recommend that. Organizing your notes can also help you internalize what you've heard in the meeting. Like maybe as you're going through your notes, you remember an example that someone used, and you can now add that to your list of things you want to look up. So you're building your knowledge, and you can also add it into your notes for other people. Also, don't be afraid to send the messy version first. So let's say you haven't, they want the notes immediately following the meeting, and you're a little nervous about it because they're kind of messy and you did them in just your own style. Don't be afraid to send those out because they'll just use those to pull their action items out of. And then you can send the organized version later and they'll use that for reference afterwards. At Telltale, we used Google Docs. So they could look at my document as I was editing it, so they could get their action items. And then when they went back to it, it would be fully organized. All right. So there are two major perks to taking notes in meetings that will get you attention. And the first is getting into meetings way above your pay grade. Seriously, because I was taking notes, I was in every leads and director review. I also got to be in department meetings for departments I wasn't even in just because they knew I took good notes. And probably my favorite was I got to be in our weekly IP holder meeting with our executive producer in Mojang, which meant I was learning things that even the leads didn't know. In fact, I would sometimes be cornered by the leads after the meeting to ask how it went, which made me feel very important and got me attention. The other thing that taking notes can help you do is get into meetings with the department you want to be in. So in my case, it got me into the writers' rooms, which was really fun. So I got constant FaceTime with the writing team, and they knew who I was and knew I went above and beyond with my notes. So that was all very, very positive. It's not necessarily possible for everybody to be able to get into other departments' meetings. And I totally understand that. But if you get the opportunity to, I highly recommend it. Okay, so next, playtesting. If you're in QA, this obviously doesn't apply to you. You don't need to volunteer for more playtesting. And small tirade, but QA is a completely valid career path and not just an entry-level stepping stone into another department. The QA team they're the unsung heroes of game development, and they're constantly crapped on by the Twitter sphere. So be nice to your QA team. QA, you're awesome. Tirade over. So for the rest of us, Volunteering to playtest has a lot of different benefits. For example, it can get you in front of people you normally wouldn't talk to. For Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, we introduced a lot of new game mechanics. So I got to talk to programmers and things like that I never would have normally spoken to just because I was testing their thing. I have very low skill level when it comes to playing games. I'm not very good. And that can sometimes be helpful for playtesting because I'm kind of the lowest common denominator player. Some review meetings will also ask that someone play the game while everyone else watches. I am really nervous to do this. Because I don't have a lot of confidence in my skills. But at Telltale, that meant that the player was the one making the dialogue choices, so it was a little less scary. Just make sure to be ready to answer questions as you play. That's really the biggest point of playtesting. For example, I playtested a boss once for Avengers, and the designer asked me things like what visual cues I was picking up, or if I knew what I was supposed to be doing at any given moment. For Telltale, it was all about if you took a long time to make a choice or you chose the silent option. The question was, were there any choices that you felt were valid, or did you think they were all valid? And that's why you didn't choose one. Our display text also was slightly different from the dialogue that would come after it. And so we were often asked if it felt like the game honored our choice. But really, you're just being a data point for whomever you're playtesting for. So just be honest. Next is Scratchvio, which is probably my favorite way to get to know my coworkers and to get attention from other members of the team. For people who don't know, Scratch is the temporary voiceover that's put into the game to help get levels on their feet before the script is really settled and before you bring in voice actors, which costs a lot of money. So this is typically done by employees who are decent at reading a line. They don't have to be super great actors. They just have to be nice to listen to. I did theater, in case you couldn't tell. I did theater growing up, so I really love doing Scratch. And I'm a woman in game development, and because there are so few of us, you tend to get asked to do practically every female character in the game, so it's really fun. I know not everybody is comfortable doing this. They don't like to do something that's silly, or they feel silly, or they don't like the sound of their own voice, and that's okay. But I have been pleasantly surprised by every single one of my coworkers that's done Scratchvio. Seriously. Telltale even had employee table reads where employees would get assigned the roles. And it kind of felt like you were in high school again, reading a Shakespeare play. Like there was that much giggling. But it was really like a team bonding experience to do it. So why am I telling you to do Scratchvio? Number one, the audio team is the best. I am extremely biased because I work with them a lot, but the audio team, they're amazing. They're at the end of the pipeline, so they're often forgotten or left out of decision making, even though they touch every single part of the game, like every single part. Like if you were an enemy designer and you're creating a robot army, don't you think that robot army would be so much scarier if they all spoke in unison and there was like this creepy radio fuss over their voice? Or maybe you're a level designer and people are not figuring out that they need to go in the direction of the explosion because they keep missing the explosion. So you add explosive noises like right in their ears so that they know they should be looking for one. They touch everything. So getting some time with the audio team one-on-one doing Scratchvio just is going to make you a better collaborator. It means you're less likely to forget them when you're putting something together. It also lets you see the game story from a different perspective. Let's say you don't touch the story practically at all in your day-to-day job, and you get asked to read for a minor villain, and you find out from their script that they're trying to take over the operation from the main villain. It's something you never would have known had you not come in and read that part. It also gives you a chance to get away from your desk. If you're remote, obviously you're still at your desk, but it's a nice break from whatever your job is. And probably my favorite part is you get noticed when your voice shows up in the game. Probably my favorite thing in the entire world is when I'm in a meeting and I'm talking and someone realizes why they've heard my voice before, especially if it's for a role that's very different from my own personality. Like I would be the Scratch voice for Stella, who was the minor villain in Minecraft Story Mode, and someone would go, "Oh my God, that was you." And immediate attention. It's really fun. Audio is always looking for more people to do Scratch, and I think a lot of the time it's because people don't know what it is or don't know that we do it. So please volunteer, even if it's just to read 3 lines from a character that immediately dies. It's a blast, and you can get to know your audio team, and it's awesome. Okay. One last way to get to know your coworkers and get noticed by them is to audit new hire training. Like I said at the beginning, onboarding and training in the industry is not universal. But if there's a formal process at your studio, or you just know someone got hired in the position you want to be in or the position right above you, ask if you can listen in on their training. The worst they can say is say no. The worst they can do is say no. But it'll let you get to know people who are closer to your level. If it's someone who has the job just ahead of yours, they have been in your position recently and you are basically peers. So you're going to be growing up in the studio together. So it's good to get to know them. It also lets you learn the kind of skills you'll need for your next promotion. And you can direct your self-study and all of that research toward bettering those particular skills. You also won't need as much onboarding. When you're promoted, you can hit the ground running because you've already had this training. It's valuable to listen in on this stuff, even if you think you know everything there is to know about that position, because hearing about it from somebody else will give you tips and tricks you never would have come up with on your own. At Telltale, we hired a big group of narrative designers and writers at the same time. And so our narrative design director put together a kind of formal class to teach them the proprietary engine and how we approach storytelling at the studio. And I asked to sit in. And I didn't participate because obviously this is their training. They're trying to get to the point where they can just jump in and work. So I didn't want to take time away from that. But it let me see more about the engine, which meant when I was actually writing for the game, I already knew all of the stuff I needed to. And I also got to know a lot of people who were new to the studio and were similar or just above me in level. And so it was a really great experience to kind of create a peer group. Plus, I was volunteering for a course taught by the narrative design director who had an opinion on whether or not I could be a narrative designer. So it was a good idea to get FaceTime with him too and show that kind of initiative. All right. So work over, busy stuff over. It's time to talk about the best people to get noticed by at your studio. Friends. You are probably spending a lot of time at your studio at this point, or at the very least on the computer with your studio at this point. And maybe you like the people you work with. Maybe you even want to be friends with them. I'm not going to teach you how to make friends and influence people, but I do have some unconventional methods for if you're still eating lunch alone and you're just really nervous about talking to these really cool people who make games for a living. In addition to making you more comfortable at your studio, which is great, there's actually some job reasons that you may want to make friends at your studio. In that same survey where I asked people what they wish they would have known before they started at their first job, I got a lot of responses like this, wishing they'd known some of the internal politics or office gossip at the studio because they'd kind of stumbled into some awkward situations without knowing it and kind of put their foot in their mouth. A lot of people are too embarrassed to ask about this kind of stuff to their manager or the person they report to or their coworkers that they don't know very well. But friends will give you the unvarnished truth. I relied on my friends a lot at Telltale for dealing with executive leadership and directors because I would observe something or see something or listen to something and be like, I don't understand what's going on here. And I'm really worried about getting in the middle of it. So I would ask my friends and they could kind of clarify. So it avoided any kind of embarrassing situations. Another good thing about making friends at your studio is that it sort of dismantles or demystifies, I suppose, the hierarchies in your studio. It's kind of hard to be intimidated by the senior programmer if you're also killing him once a week in One Night Werewolf. I really like seeing people in both their professional and casual settings. At Crystal, while we were still in the office, we had a running lunch game of Resistance, which is a deception game. And it was always really fun when someone came up to one of my friends and ask them a work question, because they would go from absolutely lying about not being a spy to answering professional work question. And then they would go back, and it was so cool to see those two different settings because I couldn't be intimidated by them anymore. I saw the switch. So how do you make these friends? You listen. You listen for opportunities to make friends. A lot of game developers are also board game nerds. So maybe there's a weekly board game night at your studio. Ours was on Fridays at Telltale. Or maybe there's a game during lunch, like our Resistance game. Or something I was really proud of at Telltale is I volunteered to play a campaign of Pandemic Legacy with 3 coworkers I'd never spoken to before. We were from completely different departments, and we ended up becoming this extremely tight-knit group that I would never have known about had I not put myself out there. Board games are really great because there's a task to complete. So there's less likely to be awkward silences or a lot of personal questions. Even if you're joining a long-standing board game group, they're going to be so focused on teaching you the rules and whatever homebrewed home rules they have that you're not going to be the center of attention quite as much as you think you will. And by the 4th or 5th game with these groups, you're going to feel like one of them. There's also Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't play a lot of D&D before I joined the games industry, but I'm really glad that I had some knowledge of it, because though Dungeons and Dragons is more complicated than your average board game, it gives you a longer amount of time to get to know a group. So it also gives you this sort of standing social engagement outside of work, especially when you're an entry-level employee. You can kind of go work, and not focus on anything else. So it's nice to have dedicated like 4 or 5 hours that we're going to be playing this game. So listen for games and groups that are looking for new players. Maybe if you don't want the time commitment of a full campaign, someone is putting together a one-shot with pre-generated characters. In fact, if the character sheet is what intimidates you, which it was for me, you can ask your game master to help you make the character, even make it for you. And so you can kind of dive in without all of the complicated math and skills and things like that. We had a running D&D game during lunch at Crystal, so we only played for an hour once a week. But we got to know so many different people at that table. And it was kind of cool to see who became sort of the heroes of the story. And I really, really liked that. And then during COVID, I actually joined an online game with a coworker, and it let me get to know some people from different studios, which was pretty cool. And we hope to meet in person one day to roll dice at a table. So I'm by no means an expert in D&D, but every time I've played with coworkers, it has been a blast. So I definitely recommend it. And if you want some less nerdy hobbies, okay, there's always sports. Telltale had a push-up club where once a day people would get together to do 100 push-ups, which was always very interesting to see out the window. Maybe there's a running group at lunch that you could join, or an intramural studio team. So maybe your studio faces the other offices in your office park in volleyball or something. Again, if you're not looking for a huge time commitment, maybe try out a studio fitness class. I visited our yoga class once or twice at Telltale, and it was a cool bonding moment with a lot of people. Again, time commitment issues, look for one-off events. Like maybe your studio organizes a karaoke night, or one of the teams is going to do an escape room. I highly recommend looking for activities for the same reason that I recommend board games. If you have a task to complete, there's fewer awkward silences, and it can be less uncomfortable than, say, a mixer or that kind of thing. Going for coffee might be nice, but it's kind of hard to get the conversation flowing, especially with people you don't know very well. If you are remote, obviously this is all a lot harder, but you just gotta be looking for those opportunities. Our Resistance game actually went fully online when we all started working from home. They homebrewed a version that worked over Zoom. I know there's a Discord server that plays One Night Werewolf completely text based, which was really cool to find out. Our studio organized Zoom events to get to know people one-on-one. But sometimes it's as simple as noticing when a coworker brings up a show you love and then following up to see what they think about it. Or maybe someone in a Zoom call is wearing a Critical Role shirt and you're like, oh, there are critters at the studio. Maybe we could all maybe watch live once and talk about it over Discord. That would be cool. If you grew up in the 90s or the 2000s, you know that internet friends are just as valid as in-person friends, and that goes double when they work at your studio. So you may have figured out kind of what I've been hinting at this whole time, why you're getting to know these people, because I'm trying to get you mentors. You can definitely go around your studio and ask for mentors if you want to, but sometimes it's easier to have mentors find you. I asked those same game writers if they had mentors in the industry, and I got some pretty overwhelming responses, including a mentor is extremely crucial for growth in the industry. So how do you find mentors? That is the question that I have technically already answered for you a couple of times. So how do you find mentors? Maybe your manager is giving you career advice now. That's a mentor. Or the person you report to has already started tailoring all of your tasks to help with your career goals. Mentor. Or your coworkers from the level design team have enjoyed having you take notes for them so much that they just invite you all the time. Even when they don't need notes taken, they just want your opinion on stuff. You've got a group of mentors. Or maybe you have an audio designer in your D&D group and they volunteer to teach you the audio engine on the side because they know you're interested. Mentor. Most of my mentors, I've realized, are mentors in hindsight because I think about all of the things that they've done for me. And I'm grateful for every single one. Having people looking out for you in this crazy creative industry is essential. So use your listening power, build your knowledge base, get noticed, and these people will find you. But if you are still having trouble and you just haven't found the right mentor yet, ask yourself these questions. Who is doing what I want to be doing? Who in your studio has your dream job? Maybe it's time to get some one-on-one time with them. Who is one step up from where I am now? Maybe you met them in new hire training. Or maybe you just know that somebody is just above you. It's worthwhile to seek this person out because they were where you were super recently. You can learn from their immediate successes and failures. Has anyone made the move you want to make? If you're changing departments, has anyone already made that jump? You better believe I sought out the narrative designer who used to be a CDA, and I consider him a mentor. Hi, Juan. And finally, who has time? Because game developers are busy and not everyone has time to be a mentor. It's important. Notice there are mentors on this particular slide because it's really important to have more than one. Your mentor is going to get busy, and so you want someone else that you can turn to at any given time. It's totally fine if someone doesn't want to mentor. If they don't want to mentor you, totally fine. I haven't run into a lot of people who don't. Most people just don't have time. And if they don't have time, they tend to recommend someone they know who does. And don't worry if that person is outside of your studio either. Again, not everybody stays at their studio forever, so it's good to know people elsewhere and who might have different experiences. So, okay. All of this advice has been to help you get noticed by other people in your studio. My last piece of advice is just for you. Go home on time. Not enough people in this industry are telling newcomers that. This entire presentation is not to give you a to-do list. It's just to give you options. This right here is the only prescriptive advice. Go home on time. In November of 2017, the day that the second episode that I'd written on for Minecraft Story Mode launched, I was unceremoniously laid off with 89 of my coworkers, including the 3 CDAs. If I had known back at the beginning that that was how it was going to end, the only thing I would change is having a life outside of work. I worked upwards of 60-hour weeks at my job trying to do all of these things at once. And we had a deck on the fourth floor of our building, and I spent most of my time on that deck sobbing because I was burnt out and stressed and didn't know if I was doing anything right. I wished I'd had a life. I asked those same game writers how important work-life balance was for them, and these are my answers. I mean, it's pretty important, very important, huge, the most important thing. I don't think I can change the entire industry with a talk. I said that at the beginning, but I can get newcomers to stop buying into the idea that crunch is necessary. The average person only stays in this industry for 5 years. I don't want that to be you. I want you to succeed and to have people you count on. That's why this talk exists. When I was laid off, I ran to my mom's house and I hid for a week. I stayed off the internet. I didn't talk to anybody. But when I came out from under that rock, the people I reported to had written me these glowing reviews on LinkedIn. And my coworkers had gotten me my writing samples and had put me in touch with narrative teams that were hiring. And my friends were all giving me support and saying it was going to be okay. Game development is tumultuous and unstable, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But getting noticed by the right people can make it easier. Okay. So, in summary, your goal is to get noticed by your manager, by the person you report to, your coworkers, your friends, your mentors. Gain confidence to get their attention by using listening and building your knowledge base, letting it inform your self-study. And do not burn out to succeed. Work hard. Be exceptional. Then disconnect and have a life. Making games can seem like a dream, but the real dream is working on something you love and having a life you love. One last request. Pass it on. I am here right now because people noticed me, and I want to give people that same opportunity. I hope you'll do the same when it's your turn to notice. Thanks for listening.